welcome to round number 4 of the Go-Kart Championship in 2020. This is the penultimate round of the season, and this time we are headed to Q Leisure, also known as Brighton Karting. Now, it's a track none of us have ever been to before, and this was recorded all the way back in February, so quite a long time ago, but quite different conditions to the picture they have on their website for our event there. It was murky, it was grey, and it was a little bit damp as well. It had been raining the night before, so the track was wet, but it wasn't actually raining as we went there. Also, unfortunately, the first time we went there in the year, they didn't allow us to use our helmet cameras, so no footage from that day. But later on, we did go back in the year after lockdown had lifted, so I have some footage to slip in there so you can get an idea of the track. We'll get on that into a minute. Let's have a look at the championship standings as we go into this penultimate round. I'm leading, but not by a massive amount. Only 13 points in it between myself and Tom, sitting in second place. Remember that last round, I did pretty badly at Bayford Meadows. Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong for me, but maybe it equals it out from earlier on in the year where Tom didn't have much luck himself. Didn't have the fastest karts and maybe lost some points there. John sitting in third place on 128 points, just ahead of my dad on 112. And Dom is on 101 points. That's the top 5. So let's look 6th through 8th. Chris is on 85 points. Greg is on 74 points. Also sitting on 74 points is Victor after a great round last time out at Bayford Meadows, where he scored a win in the last race of the day. And at the bottom of the standings we have Tom B, Kim and Jake. Of course, all three of them have only competed in one round, as had the 3 previous. So let's look ahead here to the next round of this championship, which is the penultimate round of the season. So quite an exciting one here. Big championship permutations. So this is some footage that I recorded later on in the year. This was after lockdown had lifted. And you can see it is dark, whereas the actual racing that we did back in February was in the daytime. So I apologise that I have to slip in footage from this nighttime event into the daytime footage, which actually happened back in February. But you know, we didn't get to use our helmet cameras back then, but we did here today. So that's the reason why I'm using this. But it gives you a good idea of the track and where it sort of goes. So unfortunately, many of you may know who are sort of fans of this series and sort of around the south of England, Filching Manor, which is a track that started off this championship and we ran it solely at that track for many years. That unfortunately closed down through the coronavirus and the lockdowns, the revenue loss they got through that. Unfortunately, that track is gone forever now, so we'll never get to go back to that event, which is a big shame. My point being is that it used to be obviously most people's favourite tracks, but I'd say now this is a lot of people's favourite tracks just because of the variance in the corners. There's some fast bits, there's some technical bits as well, but a really good variation. So now you're seeing some of the GoPro footage I got from the side of the track. Now this was located on the top of their sort of race control building, so we've got one angle looking this way and then one angle looking the other way, sort of through the first couple of corners. So you get let out the pits, and then it's an interesting sort of complex of tight corners, and we'll show that through some onboard in a second. And then you sort of go across the start finish line, down the hill, and then there was a big water splash on the day. Unfortunately, we didn't obviously get any footage, as I mentioned there, but there was a really big amount of water there. You sort of, were you going to avoid it, or were you going to go through it? Because of course avoiding it really did cost you time, but then going through it obviously got you drenched and you weren't exactly sure how your car was going to be on the other side of it. So we're back to some footage from later on in the year. This is on board with John. So you can see what I mean here. You get let out of the pits just there, and then you go through these sequence of corners which end up being quite tight, so you sort of really switch back on yourself here. And as I mentioned, this is footage from later on in the year, but it was a very similar scenario on the wet day and the start of the year. There were lots of other people out on track. There was of course only sort of 5 of us out there. I should actually mention there was myself, Tom L, Tom C for his first round of the season, John and my dad. So there was 5 of us out there for this event. And you can see here, it was very, very busy on this day later in the year, and it was exactly the same at the start of the season. Possibly even more karts out on track start of the year, because of course they didn't have so many COVID restrictions. Well, at the time, none of us knew that existed. So yeah, we had a lot more karts out on track. I think it was nearly up to 20. So a lot more busy, and the wet conditions, but you know, we're in slower cars, so that's slightly spread out. But you can see here, John trying to get past this guy in this footage here, he did struggle to get past him there, but I think he ultimately did set a faster time than him. But you can see what I mean. This track gets super busy, and it's certain parts of the track where it really sort of closes up and bunches up, I should say, and lots of karts come together, which of course creates interesting racing. Now, unfortunately, the format here wasn't how we normally like to run our events in this championship. We normally like to have a couple of races after a qualifying session. Unfortunately, it just didn't play out that way for this event, so we had two 15-minute time trials basically, and the way the points would be scored would be the two main events would be the first and second time trial, and then you'd also get sort of fastest lap points for the average over the session. So the only times we got with the fastest in the session are lap average over a session. So slightly different, but we've worked with it as best as possible. So back on board with my dad. He's got some footage from later on in the year as well. Now, as I mentioned, the event that we took part in earlier on in the year, which is obviously the championship round I'm commentating on, that was actually wet, and we were actually running in the slightly slower karts. So we were using the 270 Sodi karts in this footage you're seeing here, and the footage at the onboard you've seen from myself and John so far. So they're the fastest karts they sort of have as rentals around this track. The ones we were using back in February, I think, were the 200cc karts, sort of the family karts, and I think there were also some kid karts out there as well for some of the younger drivers. So I'm not sure that really depends on age or why they give certain people slower karts, but yeah, it did obviously throw out a lot of variation out there. You were coming across karts a lot slower than you, and of course us five that were at the event had been karting before. There were some other really strong karters out there as well, but then at the same time there were some people that had probably never been karting before, so we're taking some interesting lines, having spins, so you're having to keep an eye out for that whilst trying to go for your fastest lap. So the fastest lap average is actually quite an interesting one to throw into the mix, because of course it's not ideal. We'd rather have the event how we would have done it at Filtering Manor or Lid or for, all the others, for example, but it's an interesting one, the lap average, because of course you're passing traffic. It kind of is an indication of what your pace would have been like through the race, because of course that's your pace over the whole event or the whole 15 minutes, and therefore kind of similar to what it would have been like if the race was 15 minutes long and you're passing karts. And it's an interesting one. The fastest lap average, and even when we went back later in the year, we didn't even get that. So bit of a strange one, but lucky we did get that information because it helped out quite a bit for the championship standings and making this one a fair one. So very busy out on the track, and as you're seeing, the track is actually getting drier and drier as the event goes on, understandably, as the karts go over it. It was raining the night before, and we were the first event out on track, if I remember correctly. So when we first got out there, very slippery. Of course, the first lap times weren't going to be so fast. The idea was obviously to get them down in the second one, and everyone actually did improve on their second run, I think, by the look of it. It was everyone I think improved by around a second on their second time out. Some more, but we'll get to that later on. Seeing some more footage from John here. He's doing his best, overtaking a few karts out there, and for me this track actually, it's hard to say whether it's my favourite, but it's up there. I think in the top 3 right now. It's close. I mean, I enjoy Lid and Bayford Meadows quite a lot that we run in this championship. If we're discounting the ones that have unfortunately left the championship over the last couple of years, as I mentioned. Brooklands, which was the really small track that we went to, mostly known for the winter championship that we run, and also one of John's favourite tracks. He got many wins around there. And also Filtering Manor. Both of those tracks over the last 12 months have actually sadly been sort of knocked down and won't be used as kart tracks anymore for a couple of different reasons, but we don't really need to get into that. But it's a shame. But as I'm saying, top 3 kart tracks that we run in this series, and just generally top 3 kart tracks that I've been to, I think Lid is always going to be up there for me. It's a nice, really nice one. It's a really tricky one, but I really enjoy Lid. This one also, and Bayford Meadows. To be fair, I haven't been to many. Let's be perfectly honest. I know lots of karters out there would have been to all 15, 20, 30 tracks over in the country. I mean, I still know I've got a lot to go to, but this was a massively fun one for me, especially on the rental kart level, because of course when you go professional in terms of karting, they get quicker and you need slightly bigger tracks because of it, and you need a slightly different layout of track, because tracks like this I don't think would work particularly well with a pro kart. You would just get completely lost. You wouldn't be able to extract the full potential out of the kart, whereas you could just about on a track like Lid or Bayford Meadows. Lid or Bayford Meadows you probably could out of a pro kart, but this one is a little bit too tight and technical, I'd say, to be fully enjoyed in a pro kart. But I haven't really probably had that experience, so I couldn't really tell you. But I think around here it's probably best suited for rental karts. So we're seeing this track really start to dry here. The clouds, they're still there, but you're starting to see a little bit of blue sky peek through. Maybe the sun's coming out. I can't actually remember exactly what the conditions were like, but I definitely remember the track starting out pretty tricky. Wet conditions, obviously in rental karts you're always just generally on a slick tyre, whatever conditions you put on. And as the event went on, of course, the lap times just kept coming down and down as the track got drier and drier. And you sort of see the issue with this track, in a good way, that from my dad's perspective here. If you come across someone that's not massively slower than you, it's quite easy to get stuck behind them unless you go for a really bold move or get your lines a bit better. And you can see, and just in front here, my dad wasn't massively faster than that guy from this footage later on in the year. But after that guy made a tiny mistake, he managed to find the gap. But it's not a massively wide track here, so you have to sort of really go for the opportunities. And you see certain scenarios like that where it's a left-hander, but it turns into a right-hander very quickly. You need to make sure you're on the right line to not hit the other person off, and also get the overtake done and not lose a substantial amount of time through it. So it's actually a really enjoyable track just to go and do these sort of rental sessions, because you're experiencing quite a lot and you're doing a good amount of learning about how to overtake and what does and doesn't work in that scenario. And I think personally this has probably been one of the better tracks for me to learn that sort of overtaking scenario in, because of course in our normal championship there isn't really much lapping that goes on, because everyone's within a second and second and a half over a lap, so you don't generally get lapping scenarios so much. But in these races, where of course you're up against, in all fairness, much slower drivers, you're having to understand how to get through that traffic without losing time, or losing the smallest amount of time possible. So I think that's very helpful for all of us actually, especially in the wet conditions as well. Finding that limit in the wet conditions is always going to be quite interesting. So we won't show you too much footage here, because I realise it probably will get a little bit repetitive switching between all of these different cameras, but I just wanted to prove the point that it did get quicker in the second session. Everyone did improve on their times, which we'll get to in a minute or two. But in general, just a track that we all thoroughly enjoyed. And as I mentioned, we went back for this session, which you're seeing the footage from here, for the Winter Championship, which is what this footage is taken from. So, of course, many of you probably went through a very similar scenario, having a lockdown in sort of the early part of the year, and then early summer we were allowed to start doing things, or midsummer I should say, we were allowed to start doing things again. But this was taken actually not that long before the second lockdown we had here in the UK. So just in that gap we managed to get in pretty much all the karting we would in a normal year, but in obviously a very truncated season. But you can see here lots of overtaking going on here. I think that was my dad actually going for a back-off lap, which is an interesting one, because this was a 30-minute session here in the dark later on in the year, but we had two 15-minute sessions early on in the year, which meant that you didn't have to sort of back off for so many laps. But it is interesting when you're doing just a time trial. Obviously you want to be just making sure you pin it one lap, you get the fast lap, and then the next lap maybe you back off, regain some of your energy in your body, and then go again. But when you're doing the fastest lap average, of course you want to minimise the time lost on those slow laps as well. So it was a very interesting scenario, and thankfully it kind of worked out for the championship, and it was actually quite close in the end between myself and Tom. And I think it's in a minute worth looking at what those times were, but I think you definitely had a great perspective of what this track is like. Unfortunately, because of the dark conditions, the camera wasn't able to pick it out especially well, but you kind of get the gist of this track. In these karts, in the dry conditions, obviously much quicker. We were going around 10 seconds I think faster in these karts in the dry, in comparison to the old karts, the slower karts in the wet. I mean, I know obviously that's obviously going to make sense, you're obviously going to be quicker in the quicker karts in the dry, but a significant amount of time difference. So thoroughly enjoyed our time here. We'll be going back again in 2021 for sure. Let's have a look at the fastest lap overall from that first time trial. I just edged Tom there by 0.8 of a second in that first one to take the win. Second place was Tom, third place was John, just ahead of Tom C, 0.1 of a second between them. My dad didn't particularly get the best of the conditions in that fastest lap competition for the first time trial. He was 5th. So let's quickly look at the averages now for that first part of the time trial. Now, this one a little bit spread out, and obviously that's understandable. I was on a 53.8, a second clear of Tom, who was a couple of seconds clear of John, Tom C, and then my dad also securing the same average over a whole session as Tom C, which is quite interesting, so they both get equal 4th place points for that. Now for the second time trial, this one was extremely close, as you can see there. The top, all of us there at the top, separated by half a second, the top 3. John not that far back from Tom C as well. My dad also not too far back there. All of us within 2 seconds there in the wet conditions around a longer lap. Quite good to see there. And between me and Tom, 0.1 of a second, which is really interesting. That could be a championship decide there. The lap averages though, it was equal between myself and Tom, which means we get equal points for that. John not that far behind in the average, even though he didn't manage to outscore Tom C in the fastest lap overall. His average was a bit better, which sees him out in 3rd place ahead of Tom C, who was only just ahead of my dad in the averages over that event. So very interesting, threw up some surprising results there. Tom C doing surprisingly well, considering that's his first event of the season, I should say. Looking at the championship standings, going into the finale. This is quite exciting here. Myself and Tom L only separated here by 25 points. That means going to the final round at Lid, everything is to play for. I think nearly 60 points up for grabs at Lid, so everything really is up in the air. If Tom has a good event, he really could take this championship down to that last race. Then 3rd place in the championship, we have John on 170 points. He's probably just about secure in that, ahead of my dad on 145, but that'll be interesting to see what happens in the final round at Lid. Then in 5th position in the championship, Dom, who didn't take part in this one or the very first round of the season, doing a good job on 101 points over 2 events, or two of the four events. You know, if he'd competed in all of them, you feel like he might have possibly been in that running for 3rd place overall, so that would have been exciting. So then the lower end of the championship standings, the drivers that only took part in 1 event this season. Chris and Greg, actually, to be fair to them, did do 2 events. Victor and Tom both only doing 1 event. But interesting to see how the bottom end of the standings is playing out as well, because even though Tom C had a really good event here, as we mentioned, he managed to get a top 3 in one of the events and being actually very close to my fastest time overall in that second time trial. I was really actually surprised to see, because Tom C doesn't do as much karting as the rest of us, really. So he sort of sprang in here off probably a year off karting and was right up there in the times, and I think just proving once again that he can be very quick on his day. So that is 6th through 9th in the championship standings. So we just need to have a look at the bottom end of this championship now. So we've just got Tom C, then we've got Kim and Jake at the bottom of the standings. So in the final round at Lid, there is a lot to play for, as we mentioned here. The overall championship was up between myself and Tom. I obviously have that 25 point advantage, which is decent. It's the equivalent to a race win, but as you'll see in a minute, a bit of a spoiler. The final round of the season is wet at Lid. Experience none of us had ever had at Lid. So it was all very, very crazy. With the championship on the line, wow, we couldn't have had more, or less predictable conditions, I should say, which really did mean that we were all a little bit worried, especially myself, because obviously I went in that with the advantage. I was sort of a bit confident going into it, but then we got to the event at Lid, and rain spoiled that illusion of a comfortable championship for me. So that final round is going to be coming up on the channel very soon, before the end of the year, don't worry. Here's just a bit of a preview footage that we got from Lid. So conditions really were not very good, and you're going to be seeing, as we went down to this sort of first corner out the pit lane here, how little the kart was turning. So we've had quite a lot of rainy races this year, to be fair to us. had our fair share. I guess that's what you kind of get when you hold your championship in January and February. It's just the person behind the mic, which is the reason why these videos ended up going a little bit late, but things went on this year. You see how big the puddles were, spraying the kart through there. It was tricky, and mistakes were made, including this one off the track. Running a little bit wide, and, well, just about managed to get on, escape the gravel or the bark trap there. But nonetheless, once again, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one, and you'll be seeing this final lid very soon on the channel. Goodbye.